Well, hello there, Squirrely's dearest. I'm going to go back a couple paragraphs. It would take her some time, being slow, to realize that that was very odd, because apparently Mrs. Symington had received an anonymous letter that afternoon. Didn't she receive one? I asked, puzzled. But of course not. As I say, this crime is so simple. Her husband just put the cyanide in the top cachet, which did not mean, I don't know what I looked up yesterday. It didn't even make sense in the context of what I said. But look at Laura Lee's comment to yesterday's. Cyanide in the top cachet of the ones she took. Let me look this up again just here and see where in the world I got whatever I said, respect and stuff. Yeah, it says the state of being respected or admired, prestige, cachet. Let's see what other. It's got to be another. Aha. This is what Laura Lee said. And I welcome Laura Lee's and anybody's help with words, pronunciations, words I don't know. Let's see. There's several definitions, and I had just read the first one, but I should have known it didn't make any sense with what I was half asleep, y'all. Y'all know. The fourth and last definition says, a flat capsule enclosing a dose of unpleasant tasting medicine. Origin, early 17th century from France. Cachet. Meaning to press, based on the Latin, whatever that says. And there's also a couple other definitions. Like it could be a printed or stamped design or inscription. But anyway, for our purposes, it's that flat capsule enclosing a dose of unpleasant tasting medicine. Okay. So her husband just put the cyanide in the top cachet of the one she took in the afternoon when her sciatica came on after lunch. All Symington had to do was to get home before or at the same time as Elsie Holland, call his wife, get no answer, go up to her room, drop a spot of cyanide in the plain glass of water she had used to swallow the cachet, toss the crumpled up anonymous letter into the grate, and put by her hand the scrap of paper with "I can't go on" written on it. Miss Marple turned to me. You were quite right about that too, Mr. Burton. A scrap of paper was all wrong. People don't leave suicide notes on small, torn scraps of paper. They use a sheet of paper. And very often an envelope too. Yes, the scrap of paper was wrong, and you knew it. You're rating me too high, I said. I knew nothing. But you did. You really did, Mr. Burton. Otherwise, why were you immediately impressed by the message your sister left scribbled on the telephone pad? I repeated slowly, say that I can't go on Friday. I see, I can't go on. Miss Marple beamed on me. Exactly. Mr. Symington came across such a message and saw its possibilities. He tore off the words he wanted for when the time came, a message genuinely in his wife's handwriting. Was there any further brilliance on my part? I asked. Miss Marple twinkled at me. She twinkled. You put me on the track, you know. You assembled those facts together for me in sequence. And on top of it, you told me the most important thing of all, that Elsie Holland had never received any anonymous letters. Do you know, I said, last night I thought she was the letter writer and that was why there had been no letters written to her. Oh, dear me, no. The person who writes anonymous letters practically always sends them to herself as well. That's part of the excitement, I suppose. No, the fact interested me for quite another reason. It was really, you see, Mr. Symington's one weakness. He couldn't bring himself to write a foul letter to the girl he loved. It's a very interesting sidelight on human nature and a credit to him in a way, but it's where he gave himself away. Joanna said, and he killed Agnes? But surely that was quite unnecessary. Perhaps it was, but what you don't realize, my dear, in parentheses, not having killed anyone, is that your judgment is distorted afterwards and everything seems exaggerated. No doubt he heard the girl telephoning to Partridge saying she'd been worried ever since Mrs. Symington's death that there was something she didn't understand. He can't take any chances the stupid, foolish girl has seen something, knows something. Yet apparently he was at his office all that afternoon. I should imagine he killed her before he went. Miss Holland was in the dining room and kitchen. He just went out into the hall, opened and shut the front door as though he had gone out, and slipped into the little cloakroom. When only Agnes was left in the house, he probably rang the front doorbell, slipped back into the cloakroom, came out behind her and hit her on the head as she was opening the front door, and then after, thrusting the body into the cupboard, he hurried along to his office, arriving just a little late. If anyone had happened to notice it, but they probably didn't. You see, no one was expecting a man. Abominable brute, said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. You're not sorry for him, Mrs. Dane Calthrop? I inquired. Not in the least. Why? She had been before. I'm glad to hear it, that's all, Joanna said. But why Amy Griffith? I know that the police have found the pestle taken from Owen's dispensary and the skewer, too. I suppose it's not so easy for a man to return things to kitchen drawers, and guess where they were? Superintendent Nash only told me just now when I met him on my way here, in one of those musty old deed boxes in his office. Estate of Sir Jasper Harrington West, deceased. Poor Jasper, said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. He was a cousin of mine, such a correct old boy, he would have had a fit. Wasn't it madness to keep them? I asked. Probably madder to throw them away, said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. No one had any suspicions about Symington. He didn't strike her with the pestle, said Joanna. There was a clock weight there, too, with hair and blood on it. He pinched the pestle, they think, on the day Amy was arrested and hid the book pages in her house. And that brings me back to my original question, what about Amy Griffith? The police actually saw her write that letter? Yes, of course, said Miss Marple. She did write that letter. But why? Oh, my dear, surely you have realized that Mrs. Griffith had been in love with Symington all her life? Poor thing, said Mrs. Dane Calthrop mechanically. They'd always been good friends, and I dare say she thought about Mrs. Symington's death that someday perhaps, Miss Marple coughed delicately, and then the gossip began spreading about Elsie Holland, and I expect that upset her badly. She thought of the girl as a designing minx worming her way into Symington's affections and quite unworthy of him, and so, I think, she succumbed to temptation. Why not add one more anonymous letter and frighten the girl out of the place? It must have seemed quite safe to her, and she took, as she thought, every precaution. "Well," said Joanna, "finish the story." "I should imagine," said Miss Marple slowly, "that when Miss Holland showed that letter to Symington, he realized at once who had written it, and he saw a chance to finish the case once and for all and make himself safe. Not very nice, no, not very nice, but he was frightened, you see. The police wouldn't be satisfied until they'd gotten the anonymous letter writer. When he took the letter down to the police, he found they'd actually seen Amy writing it. He felt he'd gotten a chance in 1,000 of finishing the whole thing. He took the family to tea there that afternoon, and as he came from the office with his attaché case, he could easily bring the torn-out book pages to hide under the stairs and clinch the case. Hiding them under the stairs was a neat touch. It recalled the disposal of Agnes's body, and from the practical point of view, it was very easy for him. When he followed Amy and the police just a minute or two in the hall, passing through would be enough. "All the same," I said, "there's one thing I can't forgive you for, Miss Marple. Roping in Megan." Miss Marple put down, so it was Miss Marple that got her to do that. Miss Marple put down her crochet, which she knits and crochets, which she had resumed. She looked at me over her spectacles, and her eyes were stern. "My dear young man, something had to be done. There was no evidence against this very clever and unscrupulous man. I needed someone to help me, someone of high courage." Remember her saying that? "And good brains. I found the person I needed." It was very dangerous for her. Yes, it was dangerous. But we are not put into this world, Mr. Burton, to avoid danger when an innocent fellow creature's life is at stake. You understand me?" I understood. And that's the end of 14. And we'll go on to 15. Part 1. Morning in the High Street. Miss Emily Barton comes out of the grocer's with her shopping bag. Her cheeks are pink and her eyes are excited. "Oh dear, Mr. Burton, I really am in such a flutter. To think I really am going on a cruise at last. I hope you'll enjoy it." "Oh, I'm sure I shall. I should never have dared go by myself. It does seem so providential the way everything has turned out. For a long time I felt I ought to part with little furs, that my means were really too straitened, but I couldn't bear the idea of strangers there. But now that you have bought it and are going to live there with Megan, it's quite different. And then dear Amy, after her terrible ordeal, not quite knowing what to do with herself, and her brother getting married, oh, how nice to think you have both settled down with us and agreeing to come with me. We mean to be away quite a long time. We might even," Miss Emily dropped her voice, "go around the world. And Amy is so splendid and so practical. I really do think, don't you, that everything turns out for the best?" Just for a fleeting moment I thought of Mrs. Symington and Agnes Waddell and their graves in the churchyard, and wondered if they would agree, and then I remembered that Agnes's boy hadn't been very fond of her, and that Mrs. Symington hadn't been very nice to Megan. What the hell? We've all got to die sometime. And I agreed with happy Miss Emily that everything was for the best in the best of possible worlds. I went along the high street and in at the Symington's gate, and Megan came out to meet me. It was not a romantic meeting because an outsized old English sheepdog came out with Megan and nearly knocked me over with his ill-timed exuberance. "Isn't he adorable?" said Megan. Oh my gosh. No, I thought, never mind. I thought we read another chapter already, but it went backwards. "A little overwhelming. Is he ours?" "Yes, he's a wedding present from Joanna. We have had nice wedding presents, haven't we? That fluffy woolly thing that we don't know what it is from Miss Marple. And the lovely Crown Derby tea set from Mr. Pye. And Elsie has sent me a toast rack." How typical, I interjected. "And she's got a post with the dentist and is very happy." And where was I? "Enumerating wedding presents. Don't forget, if you change your mind, you'll have to send them all back." "I shan't change my mind. What else have we got?" "Oh, yes, Mrs. Dane Calthrop has sent an Egyptian scarab." "Original woman," I said. Oh, but you don't know the best part. Partridge has actually sent me a present. It's the most hideous tea cloth you've ever seen. But I think she must like me now because she says she embroidered it with her own hands. In a design of sour grapes and thistles, I suppose? No, true lovers' knots. "Dear, dear," I said, "Partridge is coming on." Megan had dragged me into the house. She said, "There's just one thing I can't make out. Besides the dog's own collar and lead, Joanna has sent an extra $1 and lead. What do you think that's for?" "That," I said, "is Joanna's little joke." And that's all. Now what are we going to read? Pat! Anybody help? If you want to read more Agatha Christie, you have to find a book that's at least 75 years old. Which is the assumption I've been going under, but I'm not so sure about that. But we're going to keep going with that. Because so far so good, I think. Wish there were more Miss Marple books that she's actually in more of that were on that list, but I don't think so. There is one called this is the Hercule Poirot, or however you say it. I don't know if all these are. It says the Agatha Christie collection, and then it says the Hercule, or Hercule. I gotta say it the same way. Poirot Mysteries. Match your wits with the famous Belgian detective. The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And then there's a whole bunch, a whole list. Murder on the Orient Express, some of which you've heard, seen movies of maybe. Death on the Nile. Mrs. McGinty's dead. That sounds interesting. Elephants can't remember. Anyway. And it lists the Tommy and Tuppence mysteries, The Secret Adversary, which we read, Partners in Crime. That was the first book we read that I just called Tommy and Tuppence. By the pricking of my thumbs, we couldn't read because it had a 1968, I think, was the copyright. Postern of Fate is another one, and it must not be old enough yet. And there's one called N or M, the letters N or M. If y'all wouldn't mind, when y'all look it up, I'll try to remember to look it up too. I want to say that one might be okay to read. Okay, well, that's it, and that's all. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Hope to see you tomorrow. Live at 5. Bye-bye.